Really, Travis?
Hey everyone, it's Travis the Pagan Scholar and Marshall the Pagan Undergrad. No, Marshall's a scholar in his own right.
Oh,
so,
bless you, sweetie.
This is our book review of one of the books off of each of our list that we decided that we would be reading this summer. Two book review. So yes, this is what we're going to be reviewing. If you haven't watched the previous video, you can click here. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Right there.
To find out what we are reading, but we've only got a month left, so we've really got to like put the steam on things. I am reading Eclipse of the Sun by Janet McCrickard.
You have read.
I have read.
Yeah. And
it is phenomenal. What are you reading, Marshall?
I'm reading Richard Knowles' The Jung Cult, Origins of a Charismatic Movement, and absorbing all of the wonderful information therein. So we have found that, intriguingly enough, there were some interesting correlations between these books. Not necessarily in the subject matter so much as in
our takeaway.
Our takeaway and like what we both got out of them. And so we've come up with a title for this video. And so our title thus is Exploring the Dynamic of Subjectivity and Objectivity in Contemporary Neo-Pagan Thought and Myth, the Bitter Medicine of Anti-Trend Literature. Or...
ouch! My paradigm.
Yeah, so I say with that, and let Travis take it away, my dear.
Alrighty, cool. This book requires libation.
I laugh because it's true.
Alright, so Janet McCrickard is a beast. She does not care whose feelings she hurts. I think after reading the book completely, she's agnostic, pagan, or even potentially atheist. That is not to say that she is not sympathetic with paganism.
She's very interested in the Glastonbury mythos in like Glastonbury, England.
Right.
Like, that's where she lives, I think.
Maybe Kellyanne has heard of her. I don't know. I'm just assuming that everybody in England knows each other. So, I'm sorry. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, they do the same for people in Texas.
Yeah,
Texas is a big place.
It is. So, no, but Janet McCrickard, born in 1952, she taught as a biologist. She has worked with the goddess movement, very like, you know, green earth, goddess, all these things. So she wanted to explore ideas of a feminine solar mythology, of just a sun goddess. And typically she was met with a lot of scorn, because that runs counterintuitive to a lot of Wiccan sentiments, and also just cultural sentiments. Typically we like to think of the sun as masculine and the moon as feminine. So everybody can talk about Amaterasu. Amaterasu. I totally read the book. Whenever I'm reading something with words from like foreign languages, or names, especially names from foreign languages, I'll be like, in the same way that that guy...
that girl?
...routinely gave, you know, and I just like mentally skip over them. So I'm like, in Teutonic and Scandinavian mythology, the sun was always considered that word, while the moon was always masculine, the god, that word. And so I just, everybody's heard of the Japanese sun goddess. Yeah, she's got a great... I don't know what that was.
A tree just fell outside.
Anyways, alright, everybody's from Amaterasu, whatever.
Amaterasu.
But have you heard of Sol from the Baltic lands, Zorya, the Sun Maiden of Russia, Grain in Ireland, Suna in Germany, Malina in Alaska, the Amerindian Sun Maidens, Yi in Australia, Shams in Arabia, Dat Imyan, or Dat Badan, she who darts forth her rays, and she who is remote. These are all different goddesses from around the globe. So basically, this is how Janet lays out the book.
How about Miss McCrickard?
Well, okay, Miss McCrickard. So, this is how McCrickard lays out the book. The first 4 chapters are dedicated to her setting up her cosmology, her philosophy for writing this book. So, interestingly enough, McCrickard actually cites Christianity as one of the major proponents as to why we view the sun as a masculine deity. Christianity was trying to separate itself from other pagan ideologies, pagan theologies, so in doing so, they made their god, their Yahweh or Elohim, or, ooh, I just said a bad word in Jewish. So, sacred word.
In Jewish, yes, he said it in Jewish. Oi.
They wanted to separate their god from the other pagan gods. And so, according to her research, there was a lot of solar feminine deities in that area, and to emphasize the fact that they were separate from pagan ideologies, they made their god masculine. You can find a lot of solar vocabulary, a lot of solar vernacular in the Bible. You know, Logos is the light of the world and all this other shit. In doing so, future missionaries of Christianity, whenever they would meet with the pagan people, they would say, oh, no, I mean, like, it's bad that you have multiple gods, but at least get this part right. The god is a man, and he is the god of the sun, and he is not a she. So anyways, that's the first couple chapters. It's really interesting. I definitely love the first part of the book. If the moon is centric and integral to your practice of your spiritual paradigm,
this is important. Pay attention.
do not read chapters 5 and 6.
Don't do it.
You will want to go set the book on fire under the full moon to just rid the world of its evil that blasphemizes your moon goddess.
Just blasphemizes.
So, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yes.
So then for the rest of the book, she starts out in Japan, but then she goes to Russia, she moves east, west, she moves west to all the way to Europe and Ireland, then she goes up north, then she goes down south, then she goes back up a little bit, and then she goes to Alaska, all the way down to South America, Australia, Arabia, Anatolia, and Greece.
Geographical.
Except for
Central and Southern Africa.
Yeah. So, anyways, she has explored all of these pantheons, all of these mythologies, and she's come up with these trends. The sun is typically female in a lot of these mythologies, with a brother moon god. Yes, they are typically lovers, as you find in a lot of mythology. Incest isn't that big of a deal, but there's also usually either a storm god or a morning star or evening star god that typically forms a love triangle. Another thing that typically commonly occurs in these mythologies is the sun goddess does not know who her lover is, and so one night she throws soot or maybe menstrual blood or just blood, and in the day she sees the soot or blood on her brother, the moon god.
You want the rest of this?
I got my own.
Oh, okay, thank you, sweetie.
It's okay, it gets better. So they spend all of eternity chasing each other throughout the skies, either out of fear or out of embarrassment or out of lust still. Mythology, alright. In Bedouin mythology, there's an interesting perception of the goddess of the sun. She is viewed as a vengeful, angry, bitter goddess who just wants to burn the earth up. The Bedouin people explain the eclipse as a demon fish woman named Al-Hot as consuming the sun, but the sun is so hot and bony and bitter and awful that the demon has to vomit up the sun. And each time this happens, the Bedouin tribes are like, aw, shucks. Also,
funny thinking of the sun as bony.
I know, yeah.
I mean, whatever, but...
Yeah.
Okay.
So, other things that it does talk about, explain the eclipses. It talks about just menstruation is another idea that is typically tied to the moon, but again, if the moon is central to your practice as being a feminine deity and causing menstruation, then you might have guff with this book, because a lot of these cultures understood the moon as a masculine deity to be the cause of menstruation because he would court women, all women, and whenever they had their first period, it was when the moon had sex with them. So in a lot of cultures, everybody considered the moon to be the father of fucking everybody. So, I don't know. Finally, at the very last chapter, Releasing the Sun. It's a very philosophical and interesting chapter. I dug this chapter. I loved it because she is so frank. She does not care whose feelings she hurt. She says we need to take a critical look at mythology, because to accept mythology flat out is lazy. To have an authentic relationship with deity, you do need to do the digging yourself. You can't just accept it spoon-fed and just, assume that, oh, this is the truth, this is my new way of life, awesome. You need to compare mythologies, compare religions, compare stories, and find out what resonates with you, but not just what resonates with you, but also to engage in critical, rational thought. I think that the takeaway is an 8.5 out of 10. I appreciated this book because it allows for an aesthetic reverence for mythology. I do recommend it to everybody. It's just, you know, buyer beware. You might not like what you read, but you will be a better person for it, or a better mythological follower. Tell me about the Jung cult.
Okay, the Jung cult.
What?
Jung.
Jung.
Get it right. Anyway, the Jung cults. This was kind of a trip. I only recently have gotten into Jung, so it was definitely something that I thought, oh, well, this is going to be kind of an entree into the idea of Jung as this spiritual advisor. I was wrong. It is kind of an expose of Jung as I'm gonna call a spade. He calls him an anti-Semite. He calls him a potential womanizer, and it, you know, oddly enough, he does it with love. He does it with love, and I'll explain myself. Okay, so he goes into, like, the first part of the book. It's in 3 parts. And to be perfectly honest with you, it kind of looks like he was trying to write it in 2 parts, but then he decided, no, I'm gonna make a 3rd part, make people think it's longer. I'll start out by saying that Richard Knoll is a PhD in psychology. He is a professor still at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. DeSales? Of DeSales. DeSales. Anyway, he's a professor still. He has been kind of noteworthy for the fact that he is not really into Jungian psychology, or at least not into the origins of it.
So I feel he's like a, what's the word? A neutral party, a non-invested party.
I suppose he could be considered that, but at the same time I do feel that he takes some stances against Jung as just an individual. However, as I said, the first part of the book is him going into Jung's upbringing in Switzerland. He was of German origin, but he was born in Switzerland. And he talks about how he was raised in kind of the bourgeois fashion. He went to medical school, for goodness sake. And he was a doctor. Really a doctor. But he was raised on, help me with this, Francophile, fin de siècle?
Fin de siècle.
Fin de siècle, thank you. The end of the century, which is this period of time where all these people thought that, oh my gosh, look at all this modernity around us. So everybody thought that, but there were 2 camps. There was the camps that thought, this is amazing, let's embrace this and cultivate it. But then there were other people who thought, this is degenerative. This is the world falling apart in front of our eyes, and there's nothing that we can do about it. Don't even try.
So liberals and conservatives.
Maybe. But I'm sure they were called different things back then. Kind of like nationalists and fascists or something like that. Not that there aren't any of those today, but you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But he goes into the idea that because there were these elite groups, like the groups that Jung was at Basel University, he was part of this kind of elite rich kid group. And these groups, as Knoll points out, were bored. I mean, they were bored with the Christian doctrine. Jung himself was raised in a family that was, his great-grandfather or grandfather was...
I'm sorry, I just think of like, I have all this money and I'm so bored. What should I do? I know.
I'm going to start a cult.
I'm going to read Nietzsche.
I'm going to read Nietzsche and Heidegger.
And be an iconoclast and start a cult.
Exactly. No, that's precisely what Knoll is saying here. His father was, I think, a Protestant minister, and before that, his grandfather, who interestingly enough was also named Carl Gustav Jung, I think he was a Catholic priest. Either grandfather or great-grandfather. One of those.
But anyway,
well, yeah, I know. That's his father's side. His mother's side, it's really it's terrible. All he has to say is that they were prone to hysterics, and...
As women are wont to do. No,
Whoa.
I'm kidding.
Slow your roll, bro. Anyway.
Hey, I just read a book about sun goddesses, alright? All respect for the divine feminine.
Okay. Anyway, moving on. He's saying that he was brought up in this world of Christianity is the way to go, and by the way, here's the money for school and board. And he was bored, and so he got into what is called the folkish movement.
Folkish?
Yeah, basically kind of German nationalism, only in like good old down-home religion kind of way. It is the idea that the German people are, in fact, primal beings rooted to the land. Lebensphilosophy, life philosophy, saying that, you are tied to the land, And where did we come from? Well, that gets into the idea, interestingly enough, of Helena Blavatsky and Theosophy and the Theosophical movement. These kids, these rich kids, were all into all of that, and they thought, oh, well, this is obviously the right way, because her ascended masters, they're of the Aryan race.
Of course they are.
Yeah, exactly. So Jung was kind of Aryan supremacist in a way. Oddly enough, he was not a Nazi. Knoll just comes out and says it. He's not a Nazi. He just kind of didn't care for the Jews.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, there's that. He was really into Wagner and the Bayreuth movement and how it took these past myths and whatnot, made them into these musical, spectacular events. I think that at one of the playhouses, and probably the original in Germany, they still do ever so often have like the entire Der Ring des Nibelungen cycle.
Doesn't
you know,
it like
15 hours.
Yeah.
Exactly. So talk about magic. He really bought into that idea. And it was through this versus the people that he read, like Heidegger and Haeckel and...
People with German names.
People with German names, yes. These people had this idea that we are... And Freud was into this too. Freud, who Jung, partnered with for a while, especially like when he came over to the States. Freud was into the idea that we are primal beings. Even underneath our modern exteriors, we're still primal beings. It paved the way for Jung to be part of the Ascanum Switzerland movement, the Barkulzi, being a psychoanalyst there and coming up with this idea that sun worship was the way to go. He got that from Goethe and the German Romanticist movement. It really affected him, and he felt as though this was, because he was seeing, I think what Knoll is trying to say is that he was seeing how these young rich kids, the bourgeoisie, were being affected by this Christian ennui. And let's see how many more foreign words I can work into this. But he was seeing exactly. He was seeing how all these kids were, or these young intelligentsia were affected by this boredom. And I think that Knoll is trying to say that Jung, despite being brilliant and charismatic in all the right ways and being a positive force for change in what was once thought to be some sort of netherworld of the mind, of the inside of a human being. While he was that positive force of change, he also felt that he could capitalize on it. This is something that we should look at. It is the separation of the subject from the object. There was a guy who, while he was really intelligent, was also kind of an anti-Semite, and maybe ever so often was kind of lecherous. The book goes into his associations with Otto Gross, this guy who spread his, to use an Amy Winehouse word, this general fuckery. So he has capitalized on this, but at the same time, Knoll, in spite of being rather, not necessarily anti-Jung, but definitely not pro-Jung, he still states that this guy was brilliant. He was the smartest man in the room, I believe he states at one point. That there was something to learn from him. So he mentions, and I think that this is a very interesting point, when he's talking about, in the subchapter, visionary excavations of the, how do you put it, collective unconscious, when Jung is formulating these ideas. It's in chapter 10. He talks about Friedrich Kreutzer. Kreutzer was a professor at Heidelberg University. He had a book on mythology of the Folkish people and the relationship of that to the Greeks. One of the people that Kreutzer influenced was Wagner, or at least the people that Wagner associated with. He mentions a point in the diary of Cosima Wagner. She writes about an evening where they had friends over, and I quote, "Friends in the evening, R talks once more about Schelling and Siefrance, and when somebody mentions the former's philosophy of mythology and recalls Kreutzer, R says," referring to Richard Wagner, "all these people, like Kreutzer, saw something. They made mistakes, but they saw something. Their successors see nothing, just think that they ought to say something too." And I think that that kind of sums up what Knoll is actually trying to say about Jung. He saw something, and therefore he felt like he needed to say something, and I just realized that's kind of like, what the United States Police, like, if you see something, say something. I feel as though that sums up the point that he's trying to make, that when any of us as human beings say something, we're looking at it through our own lens. That's my takeaway from this. I would rate this book 8 out of 10. Knoll did not set out to write a glowing biography of Jung. He set out to write a he set out to write a story about a man who was raised in a certain way and how that affected him. Though he does it in a kind of dry fashion, laying it all on the table and just chopping it up. That's what he said he was going to do, and he does it. So definitely 8 out of 10.
So yeah, I think that both of our books are actually, connected, as Marshall said in the beginning. It's sort of a bitter medicine. It's, ouch, my paradigm. We do need to look at our mythologies, our heroes, our sources of spiritual and mythic inspiration with a critical eye, because if we don't, we end up just swallowing spoon-fed just these stories, and we don't ever invest any critical thought into them. And that's no better than just picking up a book and saying, oh, cool, I should use cinnamon, jasmine, and quartz for this spell. The end. Done. You can do that, but wouldn't it be better if you understood all the interconnected ways that they mesh and work with each other and where those ideas come from?
Wouldn't it be better if you understood how it affected you personally?
Exactly. I think that myth is a wonderful vehicle for anybody to approach a deeper understanding of spirituality, of psychology, of philosophy, of all of these wonderful, intangible, evanescent areas of the mind. If we don't look at it critically, then we're just kind of walking around, or actually we're not walking around, we're burying our head in the sand. I suggest my book. Do you suggest your book? I mean, you give it an 8 out of 10, so...
To the people who are not afraid to look at the darker side of things, which if you're into Jung and you're into looking at the shadow, then you should. If you are a Jung fan, I still would recommend this book, because he doesn't destroy Jung, he doesn't tear him apart. So no, I would definitely recommend my book.
I just think that it's really great to examine alternative perspectives on the things that we cherish.
I agree totally.
Because that actually strengthens our reverence, our aesthetic reverence for the things that we hold near and dear.
And our understanding of the topic they're in.
Exactly. So go out, buy the book if you want. You can get it on Amazon. I think you can get yours on Amazon as well.
Oh yeah, totally. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who probably were like, oh my gosh, this book, so I'd check out Price Books, totally.
Some Jungian psychologist starts reading it, and they're like, oh, blasphemy!
This is terrible!
And then they sell it. Give us your thoughts, your feedback. A comment below is always welcome. A subscription is even better. And please, we look forward to your feedback. If you've read the books, if you want to read the books, if you do, anyways, yeah, just give us some feedback on what you thought about the books.
We'd love to hear it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
As always, this is Travis the Pagan Scholar, and this is Marshall, also the Pagan Scholar. And yes, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.